they'll match that, and they're not going below 10%. Now, they're saying that Britain puts 10% tariffs on American goods. That's been challenged actually by the government. They say it's more like 4%. But anyway, one way or another, it's our tariff rate is half of what the EU
Bitte wählen Sie eine Route.
that has been leapt upon by the Conservatives, some Conservatives, certainly some Brexiteers, to say that this is a Brexit bonus. If we were still in the EU, we'd be looking at 20% tariffs. Therefore, leaving the EU has spared us that and is going to save thousands of jobs. That, again, has been challenged by the government. It's not quite as black and white as that, I don't think.
Well, Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. Kevin Schofield, the politics editor of HuffPost UK. Well, stock traders, economists and global leaders have been hating out. As Kevin was saying, they're against the new levies, but not everyone agrees this is a damaging policy. Just before we came on air, I spoke to Ken Raposa, an analyst at the Coalition for a Prosperous America. That is a pro-tariff trade body in the US. I started by asking Ken his reaction to global stocks falling in the wake of Trump's announcement.
There's no need to look at the market and think that this is a real reaction to the real world. The stock market goes up and down. It's obviously going to correct whenever there is a situation that threatens the status quo, whether it's against a particular company or against the entire economy. So it's not a surprise that the market's going to go down. The market wants certainty, businesses want certainty, and once they find out that tariffs are here to stay, and here's what the level of tariffs going to be, because we still don't know that yet.
Jetzt zweite halblinks abbiegen in die Straße Cathedral Square.
They're going to adopt to a new economic regime, and the market will return. The companies that benefit from the tariffs,
Bitte in 200 Metern rechts abbiegen auf die
will be the
A8.
ones that the market turns to and starts to invest in.
But it didn't just fall, it dropped 3.4%. It's on track for the worst day since September 2022. That's quite a fall, though, isn't it? That's quite a reaction.
Yep, it is. It is. And you know something? We can't worry about those things. You know why? Because if you're going to worry about every little thing that could possibly go wrong, you get frozen, and that's not leadership. You become frozen by, what if this happens? What if that happens? There's a gazillion things that can happen because global trade and the global economy is a very complex machine with a lot of moving parts. Trump is saying, I'm going to take a risk, and that's what you're seeing right here. And the market doesn't like the risk. I mean, this is the market. So it might go down 15%. It might go into a bear market. But again, you cannot worry about those things.
Do you accept that
if it's terrible, if it becomes terrible, you change it. You change it. You change it. If things become really terrible, you can change it.
Is that not more uncertainty if you change it again?
Yes, you can't change it. You can't be changing it again. You have to be very. He has to be very clear and say, look, these how tariffs are going to work. There's a 10% minimum on all countries. Okay, this is how it's going to work. Then there's an additional reciprocal tariff. Those tariffs on some countries, as high as 48%, 50%, might be lowered if we can agree on certain things. Maybe a country opens a market to something for the United States. Maybe a country decides to do X, Y, Z for the United States. And then that reciprocal number gets lowered. But as long as the market understands that there's a baseline, a minimum, then things will be, understood. The market will have its certainty. If Trump is going to use tariffs, which he wants to do, to reindustrialize and entice companies to invest in manufacturing in the United States, not necessarily greenfield projects, mind you, but you and I might have a factory already in place. We can make 100 widgets a day, but we're only making 60 because of import penetration. We can't make any more than that.
Do you accept that other countries will have to retaliate now and impose their own tariffs? And that's what's going to happen,
yes,
isn't it?
Yeah, that might happen. Of course, your own country there said that they're thinking about retaliating. They might or they might not. So some countries will, and some countries will not. I will say this, and I said this before, countries will inevitably retaliate, right? But we're not trying to create a trade war here, right? Retaliatory tariff. The goal is not confrontation. Trump's goal is not confrontation. The goal is reindustrialization of the United States. That's the goal. If there's retaliatory tariffs, those things often target politically sensitive industries like Tesla or Harley-Davidson, and those aren't retaliations that try to fix trade imbalances that you have with the United States. They're there to activate U.S. lobbying groups. They're there to get free lobbying, and that's an intervention in U.S. domestic politics.
Not going to end up paying more as manufacturers and businesses pass the cost of tariffs on to consumers?
Well, if American households are getting more jobs because they're now working a third shift because the factory that wasn't producing XYZ because import penetration is now producing those things. Those guys won't be complaining. No one asks those people those questions, though. But I will say this: there's been a lot of reports, and I'm sure you've read them, from these think tanks in Washington and elsewhere that do. Let's see what the tariff would cost the average American person, and some of them say might cost you as much as $4,000 more, or as much as $6,000 more a year for the average American. It's a tax increase. But these are just economic models, right? These are just economic models that input data and come up and spit out this number. Now, we at the Coalition for a Prosperous America, we also do economic models, and we use different inputs of data to come up with our numbers. And so things like, okay, so here's what the price of this is going to change here because of an imported good, but the United States is going to produce more here, so there's going to be more supply, and that's going to actually stabilize prices. Also, more hiring, more wages, more people working, more tax revenue.
Bitte in 150 Metern halblinks abbiegen auf die A803.
Final price tag is going to be. It's very hard to figure out what the final price is going to be, like to what an American is paying and why America is paying more.
Global trade war can't be a good thing.
Jetzt halblinks abbiegen.
And again, as I said to you, we're not trying to make the Trump administration does not want a global trade war.
Well, that was Ken Raposa speaking there. We'll cross to, we'll hear from Scottish businesses and cross the US after 5 o'clock here on Drive Time. This is BBC Radio Scotland. Coming up on the programme tonight, a rape survivors welcomed a new service which will give free independent legal advice to help survivors navigate the criminal justice system. It's a new Scottish Government-funded pilot which will be based at the University of Glasgow's Emma-Rich Lochwinnoch. Miss M told me for her the scheme would have made a huge difference, which I would think that most survivors won't have, so that must be scary.
Yeah, and I think, we see it on telly. They're wearing wigs, they've got gowns, all these sorts of things. I'd never been to court before until I had my own criminal case and then my civil rape case. And, to hear that actually there is somewhere we can go, because I didn't know until the civil case that I didn't have anonymity. So questions that you don't even know you need to ask in the criminal case, I felt that the whole process was even more daunting when you look back and think, well, I didn't know that. And they had questions about my mobile phone, and could I have actually asked someone independently about this and got some legal advice? Because, I have to be frank and I have to be honest that I had great support from the police, but when my case went to the Procurator Fiscal Service, I felt in the dark. I felt like I was a witness to my own crime.
Bitte in 300 Metern halblinks abbiegen auf die M8 in Richtung Greenock.
And I had independent legal representation because there was things missing from my criminal case, that if I had actually had someone to go to and ask these questions, well, should my sergeant be here, should the police officer be here, all these sorts of things, that was only in the civil case did we have that. And questions about my anonymity, questions about my medical records, questions about my phone, having someone that could help me find out information.
Jetzt halblinks abbiegen.
Hugely important to my civil case, and actually to know that now I might actually have someone that I could have gone to in my criminal case. I might never actually had a civil case because things might have been different the first time round. And I'm
Bitte 500 Meter der M8 folgen.
my years going through a criminal rape case to think that I had to do it all over again.
Bitte in 200 Metern links abbiegen und der A803 weiter folgen.
I look back now.
Jetzt links abbiegen und danach geradeaus fahren.
Victims to have another place to go for information.
Jetzt geradeaus fahren und der A803 folgen in Richtung Portland. Bitte in 150 Metern links abbiegen auf die A804.
You can hear more from that interview after 4-5,
Yes,
sorry, and I'm going to be
please,
speaking with Sandy Brinley from Rape Crisis Scotland just after the news at 4:30. Also tonight, more people ever in the UK have gym memberships, and as it stands, it's the Gen Zs who are behind the fitness boom.
Yeah, there's definitely a big shift in younger people using the gym. I think you even find some gyms put on classes for people that are like under 18 and maybe under 16s, where they've got like younger people wanting to learn how to like lift weights and just kind of look after themselves a little bit better. I think as well the government's clearly been on a drive to promote like healthy living in the last like 5+ years, and I think that's probably mainly down to trying to ease the pressure off the NHS. I think that's a big thing that the government's trying to push, and whether that's kind of moved across into the younger generation as well, like where maybe it's spoken about more in schools, that might be a thing too.
That was personal trainer Stuart Ritchie. He's been talking to Drive Time about what's influencing the fitness trend. We'll hear from him also before 5 o'clock. But the time now here on BBC Radio Scotland's Drive Time is 4:30. Let's get the latest headlines from Nina.
The UK is drawing up a list of US products it could hit with tariffs in response to new changes announced by Donald Trump. The government says it believes a trade deal with the US is still possible, but as a precaution, they're consulting with UK businesses on potential retaliatory targets. From Saturday, imports into the US, including British goods, will face a minimum levy of at least 10%. Other countries face much higher rates. China is targeted with charges totaling 54%. Adrian Hanron, a director of a chemical company, suggests the impact of tariffs may not be all that bad.
I actually see this as a potential opportunity to win back business that we had lost to India and China in the US on pricing over the last 5 years. Now, on the flip side, I am concerned that with the significance of the tariffs on India and China, whether they seek out alternative markets and potentially product dump on the UK.
French officials investigating the deaths of a British couple in their home in southwest France have said it was murder followed by suicide. The bodies of Andrew and Dawn Searle, who previously lived in East Lothian, were found in February at their home north of Toulouse. Mrs. Searle's body was found in the garden with severe wounds to her head, while her husband's body was found inside. The West Scotland MSP Jamie Green has quit the Conservative group at Holyrood after accusing the party of becoming Trumpesque in both style and substance. He's written to the party leader, Russell Findlay, to inform him that he's taken the difficult decision to resign the Conservative whip with immediate effect, arguing elections. It comes after several Conservative councillors left to join Reform UK. Mr Findlay says it's disappointing, but he'll keep standing up for the common sense values of mainstream Scotland.
Perhaps that's illustrative of the fact you can't please everyone at the same time, but what we are doing is setting out common sense Conservative values and policies rooted in what we believe in. We believe in lower taxation, we believe in opportunity for all and fairness across society. And I make absolutely no apology for doing what I said I would do, and that is to change our party for the better.
Police are appealing for information after 10 people were injured in a 3-vehicle crash south of Inverness. It happened around 8:05 yesterday evening. Andrew Thompson has more.
Officers say the collision took place on the B862 between Inverness and Doors at Scanaport. It involved a Toyota Prius, a Land Rover Discovery and an Audi A3. Emergency services attended the scene and the driver of the Toyota and 4 passengers were taken to Regmore Hospital with serious and minor injuries. The driver of the Audi was taken to hospital with a serious injury and 4 passengers were later discharged. The driver of the Land
Bitte in
Rover
150 Metern links abbiegen und der A803 weiter folgen.
And trying to establish the full circumstances of what happened. Anyone driving in the area at the time of the crash is asked to check dashcam footage.
One of Scotland's mountain ski resorts is to keep artificially producing snow until May. Andy Meldrum, managing director of Glencoe Mountain, said it had been a poor winter in terms of natural snowfall. The site has
Jetzt links abbiegen und danach wieder links abbiegen.
Since then, the long slope remains open for sledging and beginner skiing. And that's BBC Radio Scotland News.
Thank you so much.
Yes, it's still
Do you
early
see
doors
it
yet.
skiing?
Get snow, yes.
There's still a little window. It's blazing sunshine outside though.
I've seen snow in June, so we've still got a few months to go.
Yeah, but you bring news of high temperatures, do you?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's been a funny day. I've just had cast my eye, she's casted, over the temperatures. 11 Celsius in Inverness, next a northeasterly flow, a cold northeasterly flow. Down the road in Aviemore, pushing 20 degrees. That is spring in Scotland, isn't it?
You know, that's very Scotland.
Yeah.
Jetzt links abbiegen und der A803 weiter folgen.
My goodness, the pictures are coming into us.
Oh, I bet.
Bitte in 150 Metern halb links abbiegen auf die M8 in Richtung Lochwinnoch. Jetzt halb links abbiegen.
Just everyone looks gorgeous, including your good self, my darling.
I'm sleeveless today because of the weather.
Get you. Not me, I've still got hood songs, I've not been outside.
Bitte 700 Meter der M8 folgen.
Pressure with us all week. It's hanging on through the weekend. And the start of the Easter holidays for many kids. Parents will be delighted to know that the weather's looking well set clear right through next week as well. Now, tonight, late sunshine for pretty much all of us. Across Shetland, we have the vestiges of our weak weather front bringing
Bitte in 400 Metern geradeaus fahren und der M8 weiter folgen in Richtung Lochwinnoch.
Shetland, and eventually into Caithness and into Aberdeenshire, but all it is a bank of thicker cloud, a very weak weather front, but it is a cold front, and it's the word cold that is the clue, because we are going to see cooler, colder air coming in on a northeasterly flow when that front actually dies a death across eastern Scotland tomorrow, just bringing a bit of cloud. Dry, clear tonight, chilly enough for a wee touch of frost and shelter. A lot of us seeing around about 3 or 4 Celsius away from those sheltered spots, and we could see some mist and low cloud forming across parts of eastern
Jetzt
Scotland.
geradeaus fahren.
Quickly tomorrow, 1 or 2 patches might linger in the east. That bank of cloud, which really is something to nothing, it's just going to disappear as we head through the day, and then we're looking at another gorgeous day across Scotland. The best of the sunshine, the highest temperatures in the west, highs of 17, 18 Celsius. You'll notice it cooler, so tomorrow in that northeasterly flow we will see temperatures in the east maybe 10 Celsius, so you'll notice a big drop in temperatures, and we do it all again on Saturday, just a bit more cloud at first in the east.
On digital radio
BBC Sounds
and your smart speaker,
play BBC Radio Scotland.
It's 4:36. This is Drive Time on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Fiona Stalker. Now, victims in rape and attempted rape cases will be able to access...
Bitte in 900 Metern geradeaus fahren und der M8 weiter folgen in Richtung Kilbirnie.
Pilots, which will be based at the University of Glasgow's Emma Rich Law Clinic. The pilot's been developed jointly by Rape Crisis Scotland and the Faculty of Advocates. Before we came on air, I spoke to the woman known as Miss M, who took out a civil action against a rapist who was ordered to pay her £80,000 in damages. He'd previously faced a criminal trial, but the case was found not proven. Miss M told me for her the scheme would have made a huge difference.
There is an opportunity to have an independent meeting with a KC, and for myself, looking back when I was going through my criminal rape case, how important that would have been for me and how informative and valuable that would have been. You know, I had a 10-15 minute with the person that was representing my case, so they weren't independent, so they couldn't speak to me about my evidence, which is fine. That wasn't what I was looking for, but I was more looking for advice on all the what ifs. You know, I'd never given evidence at high court.
Jetzt geradeaus fahren und danach links fahren.
To have all of these questions and not know where I could have gone with them, to see how different my civil case was, and if everyone could have a Simon DeRollo KC, then I wish everyone could, but they can't. And the fact that he was able to answer questions of all the silly questions I had of what court was like, and also how do I
Jetzt links fahren und der M8 weiter folgen in Richtung Kilbirnie. Bitte in 800 Metern geradeaus fahren und der M8 weiter folgen in Richtung Kilbirnie.
Have that legal representation.
And it must be very intimidating if you've never had any contact with the criminal justice system, which I would think that most survivors won't have, so that must be scary.
Yeah, and I think, we see it on telly. They're wearing wigs, they've got gowns, all these sorts of things. I'd never been to court before until I had my own criminal case and then my civil rape case.
Jetzt geradeaus fahren.
Actually, there is somewhere we can go, because I didn't know until the civil case that I didn't have anonymity. So questions that you don't even know you need to ask in the criminal case, I felt that the whole process was even more daunting when you look back and think, well, I didn't know that. And they had questions about my mobile phone, and could I have actually asked...
Bitte in 800 Metern geradeaus fahren und der M8 weiter folgen in Richtung Kilbirnie.
I had great support from the police, but when my case went to the Procurator Fiscal Service, I felt in the dark. I felt like I was a witness to my own crime, and actually lots of things could have been different if I was treated like I was in the civil case and I had independent legal representation, because there was things missing from my criminal case, that if I had actually had someone to go to and ask these questions, well, should my surgeon be here?
Jetzt geradeaus fahren.
That was only in the civil case that we have that, and questions about my anonymity, questions about my medical records, questions about my phone, having someone that could help me find out information. All of these different aspects were hugely important to my civil case, and actually to know that now I might actually have someone that I could have gone to in my criminal case. I might never actually had a civil case.
Bitte 6 Kilometer der M8 folgen.
Passionate about this, and I feel like I did waste a lot of my years going through a criminal rape case, to think that I had to do it all over again in the civil case, because things were frankly missed out in my criminal case. So, you know, it's just, you know, I look back now and just think how great that would have been, and, you know, it's a terrible thing to go through, but for victims to have another place to go for information, and, you know, it's all about retaining our agency. You know, our control's taken when we're raped, and to think that we can have that agency and continue through and get independent advice is hugely beneficial to rape victims.
And ultimately, do you think that having something like this in place may encourage more survivors to come forward?
Well, it gives us more confidence. We see all the time in the news things going wrong at courts and how bad the statistics are, but you know, imagine going through something. It's the first time in your life. It's so traumatic. It's not the sort of crime that you necessarily talk to your friends or your work colleagues about. You know, you haven't been burgled at the weekend and you can talk openly about how scary that was, and other people can share that with you, but actually you've been raped is very, very personal, and you don't talk about it with other people. So therefore, you feel silenced by yourself, and actually being able to go to someone independent and say, you know, I didn't feel like I could speak to anyone else about this. I've got a support worker. You know, they were really helpful, they're very supportive, but actually, legally, where can I go with this? And, you know, for my civil case, I had to go through different solicitors. Eventually, I found the Scottish Women's Rights Centre, which was able to answer all of my questions, but I went through hoops and hoops and hoops to try and find lawyers that could help me initially. And all these different questions of all these different obstacles I faced through the civil case. You know, I might have never actually had that, and you know, it's exciting, but also for me, I think back to think, well, if I was raped now and I was going through this process, it might not have taken me, you know, it might not have taken me 8-9 years to get justice, and I could have actually had these answers and had a criminal case that I felt or confident in rather than anything else. And being confident in something is really important, because our whole life is put on hold when we go through a criminal rape trial. You know, it's very personal, it's very isolating, and actually having someone else you can talk to and getting a second opinion. We do it for our medical life and everything else with our friends and colleagues, so why not be able to do it with something so personal? And I think that's what, you know, this is really great to see, that we will have a second voice, really, second place to go and speak to.
That was Miss M speaking to me a bit earlier. She took out a civil action against her rapist. Well, we can speak now with Sandy Brinley, who's Chief Executive of Rape Christ Scotland. Good evening, Sandy. Thank you for being with us. Could you explain to our listeners just how this pilot service will work?
So what the pilot's intended to do is provide independent legal advice to complainers, so people who are going through the justice process in a rape or attempted rape case, to answer any legal queries they have, but also really innovatively, I think, to offer them a session with an experienced court practitioner, so a KC, to answer any questions they have about what might happen in court. And I think the reason this is so important is that so many women feel completely unprepared for giving evidence. I've been doing some research with the University of Glasgow and interviewed 24 women who'd been through the justice process following a sexual crime, and all bar 2 told me they felt completely unprepared for what was about to happen. A number of women spoke about going in blind to give evidence, and this is just not the way to treat somebody who's been through a really traumatic experience. It's also not the best way to help people give their best evidence if you just do not know what to expect. So I think this pilot could make an absolutely huge difference to the trauma experienced by complainants going through the justice process, but also to give them just a little bit more agency and control over what's happening.
I mean, you were listening, I know, across to testimony, and I suppose that chimes very much from what you've been hearing from other survivors, the difference it would have made to her case had this been in place.
I mean, I think Miss M set out so articulately exactly why this pilot is needed, and her experience is not an isolated experience, and her case was a number of years ago, but I've spoken to women whose case was just a few months ago who had very, very similar experiences in terms of how unprepared they felt, but also how uninformed. One of the most common complaints we get from people going through the justice process is how difficult it can be to get information, and I think having access to a dedicated solicitor free of charge, where you know where to go, you know how to contact them, you can ask legal questions, and also sometimes it might be appropriate for a lawyer to contact the Crown on a complainant's behalf to get information if they are really struggling to get the information they're looking for. Because I think at the moment complainants do have some rights, but they don't often know they have these rights, for example, to information. And I think if they don't know they have these rights, they're pretty meaningless, and the best way to support people to access their rights is
Bitte in 1000 Metern geradeaus fahren und der M8 weiter folgen in Richtung Renfrewshire.
The hope is that it will give survivors the confidence to come forward. Do you think that's something that could happen, and the impact that this could potentially have?
I think this could have a profound impact on people's experience of the justice process. I mean, we have tried for many decades to improve complainants' experience, survivors' experience of the justice process, because we know from what they tell us just how traumatic the process is. And fundamentally, I think a key cause of that trauma is the fact the justice process can replicate the lack of control they felt during the rape or sexual assault. This pilot's about giving complainers some control back, having somebody standing beside them to help them navigate what is a really complex and difficult process. So I think it could help people feel more confident to report. I think it could address complainers withdrawing through the process, because that happens now because people just feel so marginal to the process or so uninformed. But I also think it could help people give their best evidence. Rape cases are so reliant on complainers giving their evidence and the quality of that evidence. But I think we could do much more to support complainers to give their best evidence, and I think this pilot could play a really, really important role in that.
Jetzt geradeaus fahren und danach wieder geradeaus fahren.
How would you measure whether or not this has been a success?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important that there's a properly funded external evaluation to look at what is complainers' experience of the project. Has it made a difference? How has it made a difference? But also I think to look at the data, and particularly the conviction rate data. I mean, there's so many factors that contribute to low conviction rates, and it's very difficult to say definitively one thing has made a difference. But I think we could have some analysis of, has this project made a difference in terms of any correlation between conviction rates and complainers feeling better supported and better prepared for giving evidence. So I think evaluation is absolutely crucial, and I think survivors' experiences should be at the heart of that evaluation.
Sandy Brinley, Chief Executive, Rape Christ Scotland, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That's appreciated. It's just coming up to 14 minutes to 5. We're going to have more reaction on, I suppose, the day after the tariff announcements from Donald Trump, and also looking at a trend of Gen Zs and more of them.
Jetzt geradeaus fahren und der M8 weiter folgen in Richtung Kilbirnie.
I have no idea, to
No,
be
I
perfectly
know.
honest.
I can't remember. I think it probably we'd have to be under 25. So
Right, okay, that
rules
rules me out by some distance, Fiona. We are going to start with the news that the UK is set to host the 2035 Women's World Cup as the sole valid bidder for the tournament. That's according to the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino. England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland submitted a joint expression of interest last month to hold the World Cup across the home nations, and the Scotland interim head coach Mick McArdle says hosting the tournament on home soil is an exciting prospect.
It's an inspiration to us all, myself, the full pathway, the players in the dressing room just now. It's a massive inspiration that one we could be hosting, but also get ourselves to a World Cup now as well. We've seen how massive the hosting the Euros in England was to the English games development overnight.
Bitte 4 Kilometer der M8 folgen.
Across the game, so hosting the World Cup will be a great inspiration, a great moment.
Rangers assistant manager Neil McCann says Barry Ferguson has proved those wrong who felt he was not up to the job since taking over as interim manager. McCann also said he, Ferguson and Billy Dodds would not walk away if offered the chance to take charge of the team permanently. Well, Ferguson was appointed on a deal until the end of the season to replace Philippe Clement, and after notable victories over Fenerbahce in the Europa League and away to Celtic in the Premiership, McCann says Ferguson has proved his credentials.
What he's shown already, that a lot of people maybe thought from his coaching CV that he maybe wouldn't even be ready to even take this position. I think he's proved that wrong. In-house, speaking to Fergie and as a coaching staff, none of us are frightened of a challenge, not one of us. And if it was to be presented to us, I don't think there'd be any of us to say, no, it's not for us, but it's too far a distance to even encourage that.
Former St Johnstone midfielder Murray Davidson says the Perth club's current plight has been years in the making. Saints are 5 points adrift at the bottom of the Premiership, and Davidson told BBC Scotland they've gone from the most stable club in Scotland to the most unstable.
I think it's been years, it's been building for years. There was players that were signed that weren't good enough, nowhere near good enough. And when we signed players that weren't good enough, the next transfer window, it was, we need to sign 4 or 5 players. It was a snowball effect. The people that came in then, the majority of them weren't good enough, and it went on like that for 5, 6 windows. And when I was there still as a player, that was the beginning. St Johnstone were the most stable club in Scottish football. And when I left the football club, I felt like it was the most unstable football club in Scotland.
Kilmarnock manager Derek McInnes says his team are not feeling sorry for themselves after their weekend humbling at St Mirren. Kelly were thrashed 5-1 in Paisley, a result that left them just a point above the relegation playoff place. McInnes says his side need to move on quickly ahead of a meeting with Motherwell at Rugby Park on Saturday.
I mean, it was a sore one for us, such a tough afternoon. I think like anything, when you're on the back end of a result of that, because we're in a league where everything's normally pretty tight. The games have been pretty tight for the vast majority of the season, but when you're losing the manner which we did, it was a sore one for us. It's all about the response, and you know, we've had some good results at St Mirren over the years, and you know, I think back last year we were celebrating with the supporters finishing 4th and securing a European spot. It was tough for the supporters on Saturday, it was tough for us all, but we're no feeling sorry for ourselves, we're no rolling over sucking our thumbs and thinking everything's against us. We've got a job today, and when you lose a game in that sort of
Demnächst geradeaus fahren.
Scotland rugby captain and British and Irish Lions hooker Frank Laidlaw has died at the age of 84. Laidlaw won 32 caps for Scotland between 1965 and 1971 and toured with the Lions to Australia, New Zealand and Canada in 1966 and again to New Zealand in 1971. And Scotland are in action against Sweden in the men's curling World Championship, looking for another win to follow up their 8-4 victory over Norway and boost their hopes of automatic qualification for the semi-finals. Scotland are currently leading 2-1 in the third end, and you can watch live coverage on the BBC Sports Scotland website and the iPlayer.
Excellent. I did tell DC Scotland were definitely going to win.
Was that your prediction?
Bitte in 1000 Metern geradeaus fahren und der M8 weiter folgen in Richtung Berlin.
The West Scotland MSP Jamie Green has quit the Conservative group at Holyrood after accusing the party of becoming Trump-esque in both style and substance. He's written to the party leader Russell Finlay to inform him that he's taken the difficult decision to resign the Conservative whip with immediate effect. Mr Finlay says it's disappointing, but he'll keep standing up for the common sense values of mainstream Scotland. Our political correspondent Kirsten Campbell joins us now from Holyrood and can tell us more. Kirsten, just exactly why?
Jetzt geradeaus fahren und danach rechts fahren.
Green has been an MSP since 2016. He unsuccessfully stood for the leadership last year, and he's been out of step with his party on issues like gender reform, so this is not a total shock.
Jetzt rechts abfahren in Richtung Erskine Green.
He was welcomed into modern, socially liberal party under David Cameron and Ruth Davidson as a working class gay man, and that he wonders.
Jetzt links fahren und danach den folgenden Kreisverkehr an der zweiten Ausfahrt verlassen.
A reform-light agenda that appeals to the worst of society and not the best, that the party has become Trump-esque. He says Scottish elections are won in the centre ground, not on the right-wing fringes in a grotesque dance with Nigel Farage. Excuse me. And he claims that his generation helped out.
Bitte nehmen Sie die zweite Ausfahrt und der A737 folgen in Richtung Berlin.
Pending, so he has quit the party and he's not pulling his punches.
That is a humdinger, Kirsten. I love that phrase. You were spot on there. What's the reaction been?
Well, I've spoken to a number of Conservative MSPs, one of whom described the letter as pretty brutal. Another said the party wouldn't advance by contracting. They seem pretty sad about this, to be honest, though they insist he is still a friend. I mean, he's well respected across the Parliament. Jamie Green is seen as a principled politician, seen as a good parliamentarian. He was thanked by SNP members just yesterday for the lovely card he sent the Drug and Alcohol Policy Minister Christina McKelvey before she died. So he is well liked cross-party. The Conservative leader Russell Finlay says it's unfortunate. He said some folk leave the party for fairly selfish reasons, and of course there have been a number of councillors who've quit in recent months for reform.
Jetzt zweite links ausfahren.
He has no regrets.
Perhaps that's illustrative of the fact you can't please everyone at the same time, but what we are doing is setting out common sense Conservative values and policies rooted in what we believe in. We believe in lower taxation, we believe in opportunity for all and fairness across society, and I make absolutely no apology for doing what I said I would do, and that is to change our party for the better.
So Kirsten, what happens now?
Well, a lot of politicians
Bitte 6 Kilometer der A737 folgen.
For election next year, and if they're likely to be re-elected, so folk are wondering if Jamie Green will be the last to go or whether whether others might join him. There is some speculation that he might join the Liberal Democrats. They are having a conference this weekend, and Jamie Green said he wouldn't comment further until the weekend, so that may just be coincidence. It could just be Hollywood gossip. We'll see. But the Conservative Party is going to have to work out how it fights the 2026 election, how it positions itself when independence is not the dominant issue and when Reform UK is challenging it for votes.
Gosh, never really a dull day in politics. Thank you so much, Arts political correspondent Kirsten Campbell speaking there. It's 5 to 5. Are there enough Scottish accents on the telly? It's something Drive Time has been discussing with actor Jay McCanny, who many will know as Isa from Stillgate.
It's about community, but it is about hearing that Scottish voice. People used to say they watched it with subtitles. No more. They've tuned in and they know the voice and they feel quite comforted by the voices. Nobody has any problem understanding it anymore.
On that then, how important do you think it is that that Scottish representation is on the television, is on the big screen?
It's so important, and it's a nonsense when people used to say we can't understand it. Look at the accents all over the world. Let's even just look at the UK, a Birmingham accent, a Newcastle accent. We pick them up, we listen, we tune in, we get it, and it brings us all together. I love doing accents. That is the joy of life, and I think to hear that Scottish voice out there is a wonderful thing.
And obviously Paisley and Aberdeen accents, that covers most of Drive Time. You do not want to miss that. Now, more people are in the gym. In fact, 11.5 million people in the UK have a gym membership. The figure is up by 16% since 2022, boosted by the Gen Zs, who apparently prefer to socialise with weights than with booths. So what is influencing them? Well, let's bring in the personal trainer Stuart Ritchie, who works in a gym, yes, in Aberdeen.
Yeah, I think over the last maybe 5 to 10 years there's been a big shift in people using the gym, and I think one of those big things might have been since lockdown. I think there's been a big shift since then with more and more people using the gym.
And are you seeing any particular trends? Is it any particular age groups or fitness levels, or is it across the board?
I think it's across the board. I also think there's been a shift from I think years ago there used to be a big focus on cardio fitness, and now it's kind of moved in the last few years across to strength and lifting weights. And I think a lot of I think it's kind of moved across to a larger proportion of females actually using the gym as well, where I think years ago you would have been maybe a bit more male dominant, but now it seems to be a lot more 50-50 down with male and females using the gym.
Why do you think that is? Is that down to influencers, or are gyms just simply less?
Demnächst gerade ausfahren.
And say that they were put off going to the gym because they felt it was a male space and they felt slightly intimidated?
I think that's still...
Bitte in 500 Metern geradeaus fahren und der A737 weiter folgen in Richtung Berlin.
There has been that little bit of intimidation with kind of entering a gym. And maybe that's why people reach out to personal trainers and stuff to kind of help them out in the gym. But yeah, I think social media might have something to do with that as well. I think there's a big presence of your how you're perceived online. People want to be seen to be training, to be fit and healthy. It's not so much of the partying and drinking in that as it used to be.
I mean, talking about that, we've spoken before on Drive Time because you gave up alcohol. How long ago was that now, Stuart? Remind us.
So it's been about 4.5 years now. It'll be 5 years in October since I stopped drinking, and that was kind of a lockdown situation, yeah.
Remind us about that, because you took a very conscious decision that it was, I suppose it was impacting on not just physical but mental, wasn't it, for you?
Yeah, I kind of hit that rock bottom place during lockdown with my drinking. It had just been spiralling out of control for years, and yeah, I just got to a really low point in lockdown, so I decided that enough was enough, and I just put down the bottle for good, and I've never really looked back. It was tough that first few, 6 months to a year wasn't easy, but the longer I've been away from alcohol, the less I miss it. I don't really... there is times where I've see people drinking and having a good time at weddings and stuff, and I kind of miss it, but it would never be enough to put me back onto drinking alcohol.
Bitte 7 Kilometer der A737 folgen.
Yeah, and we're hearing that more Gen Zers are heading to the gym. Is that something that you're seeing, and I suppose I suppose for young people who are looking after their bodies, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a big shift in younger people using the gym. I think you even find some gyms put on classes for people that are like under 18 and maybe under 16s, where they've got like younger people wanting to learn how to like lift weights and just kind of look after themselves a little bit better. I think as well the government's clearly been on a drive to promote like healthy living in the last like 5+ years, and I think that's probably mainly down to trying to ease the pressure off the NHS. I think that's a big thing that the government's trying to push, and whether that's kind of moved across into the younger generation as well, like where maybe it's spoken about more in schools, that might be a thing too.
And you're on social media, the Drive Time team see your fitness posts, of course. How much of an influence, and you touched on this, is social media on fitness? And do you think it's a good thing?
I think it is a good thing, but there's plenty of stuff out there that could lead some people off track. But like in the general scheme of things, I think like social media isn't a bad thing for like the fitness industry. You've got I mean, my business is mainly based on social media and online, and it's a big thing for a lot of like coaches and personal trainers just to get seen. It's really hard unless you're face-to-face in a gym with people all the time. It's hard to get yourself noticed. So that must be getting across to a lot of the younger generation, because everyone nowadays has a phone and has a social media account, if that's Instagram, Facebook, whatever. So yeah, there's a lot more eyes on social media.
That's personal trainer Stuart Ritchie, who works in an Aberdeen gym. It's just gone 5 o'clock.
Across Scotland, with the latest news, every kick of the ball, music and culture.
On digital radio.
BBC Sounds.
And your smart speaker.
Play BBC Radio Scotland.
If you've just joined us, welcome to Drive Time on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Fiona Stalker. Still to come on the programme, an inquest into the deaths of 4 members of a Glasgow family who died in a head-on collision on the M6 has found they were unlawfully killed. Meanwhile, the war on tariffs. The UK responds to Trump's 10% hike on British imports. The global stock market plummets. Here, businesses face uncertain times ahead. We'll bring you the very latest. To Gaza, where health officials say more than 50 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes. And we ask a well-known Scottish acting icon if there's enough Scottish accents on the telly. Let's get through before 6, but first, Nina has the news.
Thanks, Fiona. The government has put together a list of US goods it could hit with tariffs after President Trump imposed levies on global products coming into America. Ministers have released a document with examples. They include purebred horses, firearms and bourbon. So Keir Starmer has promised a pragmatic response in the national interest as talks continue with the US about a deal for British exports. Meanwhile, stock markets around the world have continued to fall. In London, the 100 share index closed down. The US Vice President J.D. Vance has urged Americans to be patient, saying the benefits will be long-term. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman told the BBC that what was happening was the biggest trade shock in world history.
It's an incredible, massive break with 90 years of U.S. trade policy, and of course, we have a whole international system with the United States as kind of the linchpin of that system, and the United States has just set that whole system on fire.
The Israeli military says it's investigating the killing of 15 ambulance and rescue staff in southern Gaza last month. The Palestinian Red Crescent says no militants were travelling in the ambulances, which were all clearly marked, but Israel says the vehicles were moving suspiciously. Civil defence staff in Gaza say at least 21 people have been killed today in an Israeli airstrike on a school sheltering displaced people east of Gaza City. Israel said it had struck a Hamas command and control centre. A rape survivor has welcomed a new service which will give free, independent legal advice to help survivors navigate the criminal justice system. It's a new Scottish Government-funded pilot which will be based at the University of Glasgow's Emma Rich Law Clinic. Miss M told us that for her, this scheme would have made a huge difference.
Questions about my anonymity, questions about my medical records, questions about my phone, having someone that could help me find out information. All of these different aspects were hugely important to my civil case, and actually to know that now I might actually have someone that I could have gone to in my criminal case. I might never actually had a civil case because things might have been differently the first time round.
French officials investigating the death of a British couple in their home in southwest France in February now believe it was a murder followed by suicide. Andrew and Dawn Seale's bodies were found at their home in Les Pics, about an hour north of Toulouse. Miss Seale's body was found in the garden. She had severe wounds to her head. Her husband's body was found inside their home. 4 people have been arrested in Edinburgh as part of an investigation into a series of incidents thought to be linked to gangs targeting each other. 2 of them are due to appear at the city's Sheriff Court today. Joanne Macaulay reports.
The police say the arrests were made during a pre-planned operation which was part of an ongoing investigation into firearms and fire-raising incidents in the city last month. A 28-year-old man was charged with threatening and abusive behaviour. A 16-year-old boy was arrested for possessing an offensive weapon for the reset of a stolen vehicle and various road traffic offences. A 38-year-old man was charged in connection with the reset of a stolen vehicle, and a 34-year-old woman was arrested in connection with a stolen vehicle but was later released pending further inquiries.
A public inquiry into disgraced Tayside brain surgeon Sam El-Jamel has officially launched. El-Jamel, who was head of neurosurgery at Dundee's 9 Mills Hospital until his suspension in December 2013, harmed dozens of patients and left some with life-changing injuries. The El-Jamel inquiry, headed by Lord Weir, is expected to begin full hearings later this year. And the weather tonight will be dry and largely clear, but a band of low cloud over Shetland will move across Orkney, Caithness and Aberdeenshire. A chilly night with lows around 2 to 5 Celsius generally, down to -2 or -3 in the chilliest spots in the north. And that's BBC Radio Scotland News.
Thank you so much, Nina. Andy's here to tell us what's happening in sport.
Rangers assistant manager Neil McCann says since taking over as interim manager, Barry Ferguson has proved those wrong who felt he was not up to the job. McCann also said he, Ferguson and Billy Dodds would not walk away if offered the chance to take charge of the team permanently. The UK is set to host the 2035 Women's World Cup as the sole valid bidder for the tournament. That's according to the FIFA president Gianni Infantino. And Scotland are up against Sweden right now in the Men's World Curling Championship. The Scots are looking to boost their hopes of automatic qualification for the semi-finals, but they currently trail 5-2 into the 4th end. You can watch live coverage on the BBC Sports Scotland website and on the iPlayer.
Excellent. Andy will be back with all the latest sports news around about 22:06. Now back to our top story. Donald Trump's sweeping announcement of levies on major economies around the world, including a 10% tariff on all UK goods imported into the US, is leaving businesses here in Scotland worried about their future. Well, John Sterling is co-director of our Beaky Whisky distillery in Montrose. We heard from John yesterday, just ahead of the President's speech, and before we came on air, he responded to us about the new taxes on US imports.
Well, it's quite a strange reaction. So partly it's relief that it's not 20% or 25%, but then also a slight disappointment that there's any at all 10%, which creates various problems for us.
So remind us again how significant the US market is for you and your company.
So the US market is roughly 25% of our turnover. We're now across 40 states. We went into America because we did the first rye Scotch in like 200 years, which has been increasingly successful for us, as well as some Nadar, gin and vodka, which is climate positive. So it's a really growing market. And now you can imagine 25% of your business is under a bit of threat with this 10% tariff.
And what will that actually mean for you? What impact will that have financially, do you think?
That's what's really difficult at the moment. I think part of all this is the uncertainty. So our next move is tomorrow we're sitting down with our distributor in the US to work out what does it actually entail, in terms of price increase, or do we have between us, do we have to absorb it, which creates difficulties. So we're not 100% sure at the moment, but potentially it reduces our market share or potential growth in America.
So what are your options now? Because you set out some of them that you were thinking about yesterday when we spoke on Drive Time. Where do you go from here, John?
Yeah, well, there's obviously Asia, which is a big market, in India and China, and they're massive markets, but they take time. So they would take years to develop. Europe is hard, and we are trying hard in Europe, but with Brexit it makes that far more difficult. So options are increasingly limited. So we're hoping we get a bit of an upsurge in people buying local and buying British and looking at the kind of fantastic products we've got. So we hope for an upsurge in that, but longer term we've got to look more worldwide.
What are you hearing from others in the industry after last night's announcements?
I think I haven't heard too much, because I think on something like this it takes a bit of time just to work out what's actually going to happen, how they're going to deal with it, how your distributors are going to deal with it, and obviously there's some substantially large companies in Scotland.
Nach 500 Metern den Kreisverkehr an der dritten Ausfahrt verlassen und der A760 folgen in Richtung Lochwinnoch.
Opinion back and to me about what they're thinking about this.
That was John Sterling from the
Bitte nehmen Sie die dritte Ausfahrt.
Listening to that is Stephanie Flanders, who's head of economics and politics at Bloomberg. Stephanie, it's always good to have you on, and I think you were listening across to that, and of course huge uncertainty, as John was saying, for distillery owners. Who are the winners and losers out of last night's announcement?
Well, I think that, there's some very big, when you look sort of internationally, the biggest losers are certainly not the UK, it's the countries that are
Bitte 7 Kilometer der A760 folgen.
tariff. So there's a 10% which everyone's facing, and that is a big deal for us in the UK, because in many cases there was no tariff at all against UK goods before. Probably in whiskey that's the case. But if you look around the world, there's, even some of the poorest countries of the world are now going to be facing sort of 50% tariff, certainly China facing more than 50% tariff. So at a country level, there's definitely some much bigger losers. And there's also countries that were much more dependent on exports to the US, Germany for one, China definitely. Vietnam, a lot of companies had sort of moved their production from China to Vietnam, and they're now going to be hammered. But within the UK, I think it is possible that there'll be even here some winners. Maybe I've heard some small businesses who have struggled to compete with Chinese and other goods in the past, maybe even competing with German and other European goods. Well, there's going to be a higher tariff against European goods than UK goods. So even if you're facing a higher tariff, if it's better than your competitors, you might potentially be doing better in the US.
Take us back to basics, if you would, Stephanie. What is a tariff, and how does it work in practice?
So it's a tax on imports, and used to be a much bigger part of government's revenues, back in the 1800s than it is now. And what happens is when a good arrives at the docks, physically and or figuratively, the importer has to pay all the sort of applicable duties and things. And so the importer, maybe it's a big supermarket chain or something is importing from China, they will have to pay these duties up front to the US government, or importing from Scotland. And then they have a question, are they going to pass that on? Chinese manufacturer and say, hang on a minute, we're now paying these high taxes, you're going to have to cut your prices. And we tend to find there's a bit of both, but short term it'll go on to prices in the shops, and then maybe people will be buying fewer bottles of whiskey, fewer of other products from other countries.
And I'm keen, Stephanie, for listeners to get a sense of how this will impact on our day-to-day lives. What kind of things will we notice just going about our day-to-day lives?
I think it depends a lot on how the government responds. So, every country faces a decision. The US has done something which primarily is going to, in the short term, is going to hurt US consumers. It's because they will not have, a lot of the goods coming from overseas will be more expensive. We're not facing, as long as there's no retaliation by the UK, US goods won't be more expensive. Nothing changes in that front. What you might see is a hit in certain sectors. So if you know someone who's got a company that currently exports a lot to the UK, to the US, you might find that they're having to lay people off. The worst case, they might be closing down. But it is a very small, because we're not hugely successful as exporting. Scotland's whiskey is a massive, is an exception. Yeah. But in a lot of sectors, we are not exporting as much to the US as other countries. So it is not going to be something that you do notice day to day, unless you're particularly vulnerable, if you're particularly dependent on trading with the US.
Just finally, the US stock market fell. There's uncertainty in so many countries. What do you think Donald Trump's end game is?
He said what his end game is, and I think we should all probably listen to it, because about a year ago he said he was going to do this and no one believed him. Now we're realising. But he has said he wants to bring production back to the US. He wants to make a lot more money with tariff revenues, so that means that you'd still have imports, but you'd be paying more for them. But he also just wants to rewire the global economy to have more production in, a place that's quite expensive to make stuff, namely the US. You might get some of that if these tariffs stick, because some of them are so high in areas like autos. But there's enormous adjustments that are going to happen on the way there, and probably a decline in global trade that will affect us all. And of course, it's Donald Trump, right? So he might also just be open to a deal, and all this will go away in a few months' time. But it doesn't quite feel that way.
We'll get you back on to talk about that. Thank you so much, Stephanie Flanders there, Head of Economics and Politics at Bloomberg. The time is 5:15 now. A Libyan writer and politician who published documents linking his country's intelligence service to the Lochwinnoch bombing has been arrested on national security charges. Samir Shigwara was taken into custody 2 days after the BBC reported that the files could form evidence against a Libyan who's been accused of building the bomb that brought down Pan Am 103. Our Home Affairs correspondent David Cowan is here. Dave, can we start with the documents? What did he say?
Well, a retired special agent who led the FBI's original investigation into the Lochwinnoch disaster has described the dossier of these documents as potential dynamite, was how he puts it. If they're genuine, they would represent the first evidence from inside the Libyan intelligence service that it bombed Pan Am 103, and even though, that happened 36 years ago, that's still important. As you said, there's a Libyan called Abu Ghil Masood who's due to stand trial in Washington over Lochwinnoch, and the investigation's still going on as we speak. The verdict in the Lochwinnoch trial more than 20 years ago was that the bombing was carried out by the Libyan intelligence service, and these documents appear to involve preparations for that attack. To just look at one of them, Pan Am 103 was brought down by a bomb hidden in a suitcase. One of these documents is a handwritten report labelled Top Secret. It's dated October the 4th, 1988, which was about 6 weeks before the plane was brought down. Its subject matter is recorded as, quote, experiments on the use of the suitcase and testing its effectiveness. The report says the tests were successful with a powerful and effective explosion, as they put it, from a device which could not be detected by an X-ray scanner. Quite chilling stuff. One of the agents said to have been involved in those tests was Masood, that man is going to go on trial in the United States. Other documents are alleged to involve the expenses of agents.
Nach 250 Metern den Kreisverkehr an der dritten Ausfahrt verlassen und der A760 weiter folgen.
Originally onto a plane in Malta and then routed through the baggage system to Frankfurt and Heathrow.
Bitte nehmen Sie die dritte Ausfahrt.
If they are genuine, as I say, this will be the first inside evidence that strengthens the case that Libya was responsible for murdering 270 people.
And Dave, you said there it's been 36 years. Why have they come to light now?
Well, this is where Samir Shigwara comes in.
Nach 100 Metern den Kreisverkehr an der ersten Ausfahrt verlassen und der A760 weiter folgen. Bitte nehmen Sie die erste Ausfahrt.
Now, he was Colonel Gaddafi's intelligence chief, his brother-in-law, long suspected of masterminding the
Bitte 14 Kilometer der A760 folgen.
Back in 2015. Now, Mr. Shigwara hasn't made a secret of the fact that he's had these documents. He started writing about them in 2018. That was also the year he contacted investigative journalists in France. And in January this year, those journalists, along with Mr. Shigwara, published a book titled The Murderer Who Must Be Saved. The documents are detailed in that book. The authors contacted the Crown Office in Edinburgh, Scotland's prosecution service. Copies of the files were passed on to the Scottish Police, and we're now examining them. In February, the French paper Le Monde, regarded as France's, the Times in France, published an article saying all of that. Nothing happened. A few weeks ago, we covered the story, and 2 days later, Mr. Shigwara is arrested by the police in Libya.
An incredible story, Dave. What's happened to him? Do we know what he's been charged with?
Well, he is the mayor of a municipality in Tripoli. He was arrested at his office by the police on the 20th of March. The book's publishers in France, Robert Laffont, says that Mr. Chaguara is facing legal proceedings over, quote, the alleged possession of classified security documents without legal justification. Now, the publishers say the authenticity of these documents can't be questioned. They say they contain information of major public and historical interest for Libya, France, Scotland and the United States. And in a statement, the publishers have said that they deplore the prosecution of Samir Chaguara, as well as the pressure that seems to be exerted on him to retract his denunciation of the crimes committed by the former regime of Muammar Gaddafi. The company says that it's calling on the Libyan authorities to drop the charges against them. Mr. Chaguara, after he was arrested, was held in custody for 10 or 11 days. He was released so he could spend some time with his family, but it sounds like he's going to be taken back into custody fairly soon and could stand trial in the coming weeks.
Fascinating tale. Dave, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. David Cowan, that's our Home Affairs correspondent. It's 5:20. This is Drive Time on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Fiona Stocker. It is good to have you with us. Health officials in Gaza say more than 50 people have been killed in overnight Israeli airstrikes. Speaking outside a hospital in Khan Yunis, a woman who lost her husband in the attack explains what had happened.
We were sleeping when they bombed our neighbour's house and 2 of our tents got fired. We were asleep in one of them. We were buried under the rubble. I had put my body over my children to protect them, and a concrete pole fell on my back. When I removed it, I went to call for my husband, but I couldn't find him.
Well, since the start of the conflict, the journalist Ghada Auda has been our eyes and ears in Gaza. She told me what day-to-day life has been like since the ceasefire collapsed.
Well, even before the ceasefire and since the beginning of Ramadan month, it was like the lack of humanitarian aid and the closing of the crossings of Gaza Strip, and still the humanitarian situation is very risky, and people, they are facing the famine and the hunger again, and there is an imminent shortage in the supplies, especially for food, for flour, and for babies' supplies and medical supplies. So if it will continue for a couple of days or weeks, it means that Gaza Strip, I mean all of the governorates in Gaza Strip will go for a hunger and famine again. Still the situation is very risky along the border fence and the area in east of Gaza Strip. It's being evacuated today. They are evacuating Shuja'iyya and east of Gaza, and lots of casualties are reported and being targeted by the Israeli forces. And regarding north of Gaza, we can talk about like Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia, and also some parts of Jabalia are being evacuating. The separation between north and south of Gaza is still between the Netzarim corridor. It's not allowed for vehicles to go and come from south or north, and people, they can't take the western roads, I mean the Rashid road, just to go for south and come back to north. The situation is still risky and very dangerous, and we hope it will end soon by releasing more Israeli hostages.
And Ghada, how safe do you feel?
Well, I'm not safe anymore. Like, I'm now in the west of Gaza, where people, they are evacuating, and most of Gaza or west of Gaza, it's full of tents, displaced people. It's very crowded again, and there is like an internal conflict between some protesters. They are demanding Hamas to leave the control of Gaza, and people, they are trying to take revenge from some Hamas member by killing them. The internal situation also is not safe anymore. There is no government, there is no police, there is no officials, or there is no security here in Gaza, and the situation, not even because the Israeli attacks or military operation, but also the internal situation is not safe anymore. My movement is very restricted. I just can move between my neighborhood, I mean in west of Gaza, and I can just move with some friends. I cannot move at night. it's very risky and dangerous.
Well, Gada, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there, and I do appreciate you taking the time to speak to Drive Time, and I hope you stay safe.
Thank you, Dee.
That was Gada Auda there, the journalist, speaking to us from Gaza. It's just coming up to 25 minutes past 5. This is Drive Time, BBC Radio Scotland. I'm Fiona Stalker. It's good to have you with us. Now, we're probably all aware by now that this month has been dubbed by many as Awful April, and it's only the 3rd. Our bills are on the up again and can be a pretty anxious time, so how best to cope with our worries? And could anxiety be addictive? Well, let's speak to an expert. Owen O'Kane is a psychotherapist and one of the country's leading experts on mental health. He's with me now. Owen, good evening to you.
Hi Fiona, how are you?
I'm really well. I actually am well, thank you. Now, anxiety is something in today's world that I suppose we're much more aware of, aren't they? But just remind us, how can anxiety present itself in people? Because it's not always the same, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it often depends on context, but I think the one thing we all have in common is that we're hardwired primarily to be anxious. It's actually a useful mechanism, so you know, it's a safety mechanism, and without it we'd be in trouble. But I guess the problem is that life for many people is incredibly stressful, and we live in a world that is full of challenges and unpredictability, and I think that's what's really creating a lot of the problems that we're seeing at the moment. And if you think about our headlines are filled with, you know, very negative news stories on a daily basis. It is, and a definition of anxiety is an intolerance of uncertainty. And if you think of the one thing that we've got a lot of at the minute is uncertainty. So people are struggling, and that can manifest in different ways. It might be people feel overloaded and their mind's on overdrive. So that's a lot of what if, catastrophic type thinking. It could be feeling overwhelmed emotionally. It could be struggling to cope on a day-to-day basis. It might even be behavioural stuff where people feel they need to drink more than they would usually do, just to try and take the edge off their anxiety. So it's very often dependent on the individual, but ultimately it can be debilitating for many people. And as the motivation behind this latest book, Addicted to Anxiety, where I talk about the fact that anxiety, I think for many, can become addictive, where it's almost like we become expectant to be worried. We become used to the overthinking. We become used to that uncomfortable feeling, and without it, people start to wonder what they would be without it. So
they're kind of looking for the next worry in a way. How do you get out of that?
Well, this is kind of the challenge with anxiety. It comes with a big promise, like any addiction. Anxiety comes with a promise of keeping you safe. So it's very difficult to let it go. I probably got a good example that might bring it alive a bit more. I had a client recently who was saying they'd struggled with anxiety for nearly 25 years, and they'd been doing really well in therapy. And a few weeks ago, the person came to therapy, and she said to me, God, I woke up a few days ago and I didn't have knots in my stomach for the first time in years. And I said, well, that's great. That's a really good step, a really positive step forward. And then she paused and she said, but after about 10 seconds, I started to worry about why I didn't have the knots in my stomach. So it almost becomes a dependence on the belief that the worry is necessary. And that if you're not on guard, and if you're not vigilant, and if you're not keeping an eye out for the next problem, then something could go wrong. So when anxiety becomes problematic and it starts to really get in the driving seat of anyone's life, then life becomes uncomfortable. And this is one of the things I've really tried to do in the book, Addicted to Anxiety, is to help people realise that, they don't need to live that way. You can be in the driving seat of your own life.
How do you break the cycle? How do you break the cycle?
There are a number of things, but I think if we start with the most dominant, obvious thing, it's around thought. Most people believe what they think. So with anxious thoughts are very often, what if things go wrong? What if I can't manage? What if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? Remember that 90%...
Bitte in 250 Metern rechts abbiegen auf die A78 in Richtung Greenock.
Facts, so it's kind of learning to recognise how anxiety plays out for you. So rather than over-engage with the thoughts, it's okay sometimes to let them go. Because the more we collude with anxiety and the more we get involved with the thoughts, the bigger they become. So it's about these recognitions and the obvious stuff about, your diet, lifestyle, exercise, nature, all of these things that we hear lots about.
Bitte 800 Meter der A78 folgen.
But more importantly, remembering your anxiety isn't an enemy, it's not a bad thing. to have anxiety, but it's the relationship that you have with your anxiety. If you see it as an enemy, then that's what it becomes. Whereas if you rebuild a different relationship with your anxiety, you can actually work with it, and it can be a very useful thing in your life.
Oh, and it's fascinating. You could almost hear a pin drop in the studio. I'm watching my my team, actually, Drive Time team, are all just sort of all just gone very, very quiet and still through there. So I'm hoping it's not because they're anxious. I'm hoping that they're having a moment of peace. But thank you so much for taking us through that. Owen O'Kane there, a psychotherapist, one of the country's leading experts on mental health. Now, something that is good for your health, I know it is. Stotty's on at 6 o'clock, we get it on, and he's going to be talking about...
In 350 Metern haben Sie das Ziel erreicht.
For that, he's going to be giving us a wee sneak preview before 6 o'clock. The time has just gone 5:30. Let's get the latest headlines with Nina.
The First Minister says the Scottish Government is working with ministers at Westminster to protect Scotland's businesses from the impact of new US tariffs. The UK has drawn up a 400-page list of US products it could hit with tariffs. Speaking at Question Time at Holyrood, John Swinney warned the tariffs would have wide-ranging consequences, but they would continue efforts to mitigate them.
Sie haben das Ziel erreicht.
The imposition of tariffs is not good news. It will be damaging for economic activity, not just in Scotland, but across the world, and there will also be negative implications for the population of the United States, which was applied yesterday. So we will, of course, engage with the United Kingdom government, who carry the responsibility for international trade as part of the constitutional settlement. We have been doing so for some time. We will continue to do so as part of our efforts to promote and to protect Scottish business.
Meanwhile, stock markets worldwide have fallen sharply in response to Donald Trump's announcement. By one estimate, more than $1.5 trillion.